her thought-provoking book, The Power of Not Reacting, Sari Swathi explores the often overlooked, yet transformative power of non-reaction. In a world dominated by instantaneous communication, where social media notifications, news headlines, and personal interactions demand immediate responses, we have become conditioned to react impulsively. Whether it's responding to an argument, reacting to a negative comment online, or dealing with stress at work, most of us rarely pause before reacting. This constant cycle of reaction not only drains our energy but also leads to regrettable decisions, unnecessary conflict, and emotional turmoil. Swathi's central premise is that non-reaction is not synonymous with passivity. Instead, it's about choosing to respond deliberately rather than automatically. Non-reaction is an active process that requires mindfulness, emotional intelligence, and self-discipline. By learning to pause, to breathe, and to assess a situation before reacting, we regain control over our emotions and ultimately over our lives. Swathi explains that mastering the art of non-reaction allows us to navigate life with greater peace, clarity, and purpose. When we are no longer slaves to our impulses, we become more thoughtful and intentional in our interactions. We make better decisions, build stronger relationships, and find inner tranquility even in chaotic circumstances. The art of non-reaction empowers us to be less reactive and more proactive, shifting from mindless reflexes to mindful choices. Chapter 1. Understanding Reactivity. In Chapter 1, Swathi delves into the concept of reactivity, explaining how our natural instinct to react is hardwired into our biology. Human beings evolved with the fight-or-flight response, a survival mechanism designed to protect us from danger. When our ancestors encountered a predator or an immediate physical threat, their bodies reacted automatically to either flee or fight. This instinct, though necessary for survival in ancient times, has carried over into modern life, even though most of the threats we face today are psychological or emotional rather than physical. Swathi explains that while the fight-or-flight response may have saved our ancestors from wild animals, it is less helpful when dealing with the everyday challenges of modern life, such as a heated argument with a coworker, a stressful email, or a frustrating traffic jam. These situations trigger the same physiological response, a surge of adrenaline, increased heart rate, and heightened alertness. However, instead of fleeing or fighting, we react emotionally, often lashing out, withdrawing, or making impulsive decisions. Reactivity, Swathi argues, has become a habitual response to the world around us. Whether we're dealing with a minor inconvenience or a major conflict, our knee-jerk reactions are often fueled by this ancient survival mechanism. Unfortunately, this can lead to negative outcomes. We may say things we don't mean, act out of anger or fear, and ultimately escalate situations that could have been handled with more grace and calm. Understanding reactivity is the first step toward overcoming it. Swathi emphasizes that while reactivity is a natural part of being human, it doesn't have to control us. By recognizing our reactive tendencies, we can begin to see how they manifest in our lives, whether it's in our relationships, at work, or in daily interactions. This awareness is key to breaking the cycle of automatic reactions and replacing them with more thoughtful, deliberate responses. Chapter 2. The Psychology Behind Reaction. Chapter 2 takes a deeper dive into the psychological roots of reactivity, shedding light on why we respond to certain situations in the ways that we do. Swathi explains that our reactions are not just biological, but are also shaped by our past experiences, upbringing, and social conditioning. From a young age, we learn how to respond to the world based on the environments in which we were raised, the relationships we formed, and the experiences that shaped us. For example, if a person grew up in a household where anger was the primary way of expressing emotions, they may be more prone to reacting with anger when confronted with conflict. Similarly, someone who was raised in an environment where their feelings were dismissed or invalidated may react defensively or withdraw in emotionally charged situations. Swathi suggests that our reactions are often deeply ingrained patterns of behavior that have developed over time, and many of them are rooted in unresolved emotional wounds. Reactivity, Swathi argues, often stems from our insecurities, fears, and emotional triggers. When something or someone triggers us, it taps into a deeper emotional wound or unresolved issue. For instance, if a colleague criticizes our work, we may react defensively not because the criticism is unjustified, but because it triggers a fear of inadequacy or failure that has been present for years. In this way, our reactions often have more to do with our internal landscape than the external event itself. The key to overcoming reactivity, according to Swathi, is to understand the psychology behind our reactions. By recognizing the emotional wounds and insecurities that fuel our responses, we can begin to untangle ourselves from these patterns. This self-awareness allows us to step back from our immediate reactions and choose a more intentional response. Swathi encourages readers to reflect on their own patterns of reactivity. She suggests that by keeping a journal or simply paying attention to our emotions, we can start to identify the triggers that set us off and the underlying issues that drive our reactions. This process of self-reflection is essential in breaking free from the automatic responses that often control our lives. Chapter 3. How Emotions Control Us. In Chapter 3, Swathi turns her attention to the role of emotions in our reactivity. Emotions are powerful forces that can either guide us toward positive action or push us into destructive behavior. Swathi argues that when we allow our emotions to control us, we lose our ability to think clearly and make sound decisions. Swathi identifies 3 emotions that are particularly responsible for triggering reactive behavior: anger, fear, and frustration. These emotions, while natural and sometimes necessary, can cloud our judgment and lead us to react impulsively. Anger, for example, often causes us to lash out or say things we later regret. Fear can make us overly defensive, causing us to withdraw or avoid confrontation. Frustration can lead to impatience and rash decisions. One of the central ideas in this chapter is that emotions, while valid, should not dictate our actions. Swathi stresses that it's important to acknowledge our emotions and understand where they are coming from, but we should not allow them to control how we respond. She explains that when we react based solely on emotion, we are giving away our power to external circumstances. We become like puppets, pulled in different directions by whatever emotion is strongest at the moment. Swathi introduces the concept of emotional regulation as a way to manage our emotions without suppressing them. Emotional regulation involves recognizing our emotions, sitting with them, and allowing ourselves to process them before taking action. This doesn't mean ignoring or denying our feelings. Rather, it's about creating a space between feeling and responding. This space allows us to respond with clarity and intentionality rather than being swept away by the tide of emotion. Swathi provides practical strategies for managing emotions, such as deep breathing exercises, mindfulness meditation, and journaling. These techniques can help us calm the mind and body, making it easier to process emotions without reacting impulsively. By learning to manage our emotions, we regain control over our responses and can approach challenging situations with greater calm and clarity. Chapter 4. The Space Between Stimulus and Response. Chapter 4 introduces one of the most powerful concepts in the book, the space between stimulus and response. This idea, inspired by the famous quote from Viktor Frankl, suggests that there is always a gap, a space, between the moment something happens, the stimulus, and how we choose to respond to it. Swathi argues that this space is where our true power lies. It is in this brief pause that we can decide whether to react impulsively or to take a more thoughtful, intentional approach. Most of us, she explains, are unaware of this space and allow our reactions to be immediate and automatic, without conscious thought. However, by learning to recognize and expand this space, we can transform how we respond to life's challenges. Swathi emphasizes that the space between stimulus and response is not fixed. It can be lengthened with practice. By becoming aware of this gap, we can train ourselves to pause before reacting, giving ourselves the opportunity to assess the situation, reflect on our emotions, and choose a response that aligns with our values and long-term goals. The key is to cultivate the ability to pause, even if only for a few seconds, to prevent ourselves from reacting out of anger, fear, or frustration. This space, Swathi argues, is where personal growth happens. When we learn to pause and reflect, we break free from the cycle of automatic reactivity and gain control over our actions. We can choose responses that are in harmony with who we want to be, rather than being driven by momentary emotions or external circumstances. This not only improves our relationships and decision-making, but also fosters a sense of inner peace and resilience. Swathi provides practical tips for cultivating this space, such as practicing deep breathing, grounding techniques, and mindfulness exercises. These practices help slow down the mind and body, making it easier to pause before reacting. She also encourages readers to start small by practicing non-reaction in minor everyday situations, such as when someone cuts them off in traffic or when they receive a frustrating email. Over time, as we become more skilled at creating this space, we can apply the same practice to more significant and emotionally charged situations. In this chapter, Swathi underscores the idea that while we cannot always control external events, we can control how we respond to them. By mastering the art of pausing between stimulus and response, we reclaim our power and become the architects of our own lives. Chapter 5. Cultivating Awareness and Mindfulness. In Chapter 5, Sari Swathi introduces the practice of mindfulness as a crucial element in mastering the art of non-reaction. She argues that mindfulness is not merely about being present in the moment, but about cultivating a heightened state of awareness that allows us to observe our thoughts, emotions, and reactions without judgment. This practice, she suggests, is the first and most essential step toward living a non-reactive life. Swathi explains that most people live in a state of autopilot, where they respond to situations and stimuli without really thinking. We often find ourselves reacting impulsively to external triggers, whether it's a stressful work situation, a rude comment, or even an unexpected inconvenience. These reactions are not conscious choices, but automatic responses driven by deep-seated emotional patterns and habits. By practicing mindfulness, however, we can begin to break free from these automatic reactions and regain control over how we respond to the world around us. Mindfulness teaches us to observe our emotions as they arise, without immediately reacting to them. Instead of becoming overwhelmed by anger, frustration, or anxiety, we can take a step back and simply notice these emotions. By doing so, we create space between the stimulus and our response, an essential element in non-reaction. This space allows us to make conscious, thoughtful choices about how we want to respond, rather than being swept away by the intensity of our emotions. Swathi encourages readers to incorporate mindfulness practices into their daily lives. She suggests starting with simple exercises such as focusing on your breath for a few minutes each day, or paying close attention to your surroundings while engaging in mundane tasks like eating or walking. Over time, these small acts of mindfulness can help cultivate a greater sense of awareness, making it easier to catch yourself before reacting impulsively in emotionally charged situations. Additionally, Swathi recommends formal meditation as a powerful tool for developing mindfulness. Meditation allows us to sit with our thoughts and emotions, observing them without attachment or judgment. Through regular meditation practice, we can train our minds to be less reactive and more present, ultimately gaining greater control over our emotional responses. Swathi emphasizes that mindfulness is not about suppressing or ignoring emotions, but about becoming more aware of them and learning how to respond to them in a healthy and intentional way. Chapter 6. Strategies for Non-Reactive Living. In Chapter 6, Swathi moves from theory to practical application, offering readers a range of strategies to live a non-reactive life. She begins by addressing a common misconception, that non-reaction means suppressing emotions or avoiding difficult situations. In reality, non-reaction is about acknowledging our emotions and challenges while choosing to respond in a deliberate, thoughtful manner. It's about taking control of our responses rather than allowing external triggers to dictate our actions. Swathi introduces several key strategies for cultivating non-reaction. One of the most effective techniques is deep breathing. When we're faced with a stressful or triggering situation, our body often reacts by becoming tense, our breath becomes shallow, and our mind races. Swathi suggests that by taking a few deep breaths, we can instantly calm our nervous system, create mental space, and regain clarity before reacting. Deep breathing not only helps us pause, but also shifts our body from a reactive state to a more relaxed, composed one. Grounding techniques are another powerful tool Swathi recommends. Grounding involves focusing on the present moment by connecting with the physical sensations of your body or your surroundings. For example, you might focus on the feeling of your feet on the ground, the texture of an object in your hand, or the sounds around you. These grounding practices can help anchor you in the present moment, preventing you from being swept away by emotional reactivity. Swathi also discusses the importance of cognitive reframing, which involves changing the way we perceive and interpret challenging situations. Often, our reactivity is fueled by negative or distorted thinking patterns, such as assuming the worst or personalizing events. Cognitive reframing encourages us to shift our perspective and view the situation in a more balanced, rational way. For example, instead of reacting defensively to a colleague's criticism, we might reframe it as an opportunity for growth or feedback. This shift in mindset can drastically reduce emotional reactivity and lead to more constructive responses. Another key strategy Swathi introduces is emotional regulation. This involves learning how to manage and modulate our emotional responses so that we don't become overwhelmed by them. Emotional regulation techniques include mindfulness, self-soothing practices, and developing a greater understanding of our emotional triggers. By practicing emotional regulation, we can remain composed even in the face of stress or conflict, making it easier to respond thoughtfully rather than react impulsively. Swathi emphasizes that these strategies are not about avoiding action, but about responding with intention. By practicing these techniques regularly, we can train ourselves to remain calm and centered, even in the most challenging situations. Chapter 7. The Benefits of Emotional Control. In Chapter 7, Swathi explores the numerous benefits of mastering emotional control through non-reaction. She begins by explaining that when we are reactive, we are often driven by emotions such as anger, fear, or frustration, which cloud our judgment and lead to impulsive decisions. However, by gaining control over our emotional responses, we can experience greater mental clarity, emotional stability, and overall well-being. One of the most significant benefits of emotional control is a reduction in stress and anxiety. Swathi explains that much of the stress we experience in life comes not from external circumstances themselves, but from our reactions to them. When we react impulsively, we often escalate situations, leading to increased tension and emotional turmoil. By practicing non-reaction, we can prevent these emotional flare-ups and maintain a sense of calm, even in the face of adversity. Another major benefit of emotional control is improved relationships. Swathi argues that many conflicts in relationships, whether personal or professional, arise from reactive behavior. When we react impulsively, we may say things we don't mean, make assumptions, or act defensively, all of which can damage relationships. However, by practicing non-reaction, we can approach conflicts with a clearer mind and a more compassionate heart, leading to better communication and stronger connections. Swathi also highlights the physical benefits of non-reaction. She explains that when we're in a reactive state, our body is in fight or flight mode, which can lead to increased heart rate, elevated blood pressure, and the release of stress hormones. Over time, chronic reactivity can take a toll on our physical health, contributing to conditions such as anxiety disorders, heart disease, and high blood pressure. By practicing non-reaction, we can reduce the physical effects of stress and promote better health. Beyond the immediate benefits, Swathi suggests that mastering emotional control can also lead to greater self-confidence and empowerment. When we are no longer ruled by our emotions, we feel more in control of our lives and our decisions. This sense of empowerment can help us navigate challenges with resilience and grace, knowing that we have the tools to handle whatever comes our way. Chapter 8. How to Respond with Intention. In Chapter 8, Swathi focuses on the importance of responding with intention rather than reacting impulsively. She explains that intentional responses are those that are aligned with our values, goals, and long-term well-being. When we respond intentionally, we are not just reacting to the immediate situation, but considering the broader context and the potential consequences of our actions. Swathi encourages readers to ask themselves important questions before responding to a challenging situation. What outcome do I want from this interaction? Will my response serve my long-term goals? Am I reacting out of emotion, or am I responding thoughtfully? By pausing to reflect on these questions, we can shift from reactive behavior to intentional action. Responding with intention also requires a deep understanding of our values. Swathi argues that many of our reactive behaviors stem from moments when we feel our values are being threatened, whether it's our sense of fairness, our need for respect, or our desire for control. However, by being clear about what we stand for, we can respond in ways that are true to our values, even in difficult situations. For example, if kindness is one of your core values, you might choose to respond to criticism with grace rather than defensiveness. Intentional responses are not only more aligned with our values, but also tend to be more measured and compassionate. Swathi explains that when we take the time to pause and reflect, we can approach situations with empathy and understanding, rather than being driven by anger or fear. This leads to more constructive outcomes, both in our personal relationships and in our professional lives. Chapter 9. Transforming relationships through non-reaction. Chapter 9 focuses on how non-reaction can transform our relationships. Swathi argues that many of the conflicts and misunderstandings that arise in relationships are the result of reactive behavior. When we react impulsively, whether out of anger, frustration, or defensiveness, we often say or do things that escalate the conflict rather than resolve it. By practicing non-reaction, we create space for understanding, empathy, and deeper communication. Swathi explains that when we pause before reacting, we can listen more fully to the other person's perspective and respond with compassion rather than defensiveness. This not only prevents conflicts from escalating, but also fosters greater trust and connection in relationships. Swathi provides several real-world examples of how non-reaction can improve relationships. For instance, she shares the story of a couple who frequently argued over small, everyday issues. By practicing non-reaction, both partners learned to pause before responding, which allowed them to communicate more calmly and effectively. Over time, their relationship became stronger and more harmonious as they replaced reactive behavior with thoughtful responses. Non-reaction also helps us navigate difficult conversations with greater ease. Whether it's a disagreement with a colleague, a tough conversation with a partner, or a challenging interaction with a family member, Swathi suggests that non-reaction allows us to approach these conversations with a calm and clear mind. This not only helps de-escalate tension, but also leads to more productive and respectful dialogue. Chapter 10. Non-reaction in everyday life. In the final chapter, Non-reaction in everyday life, Swathi focuses on how to apply the principles of non-reaction in day-to-day situations. She emphasizes that non-reaction is not about avoiding action, but about responding in a way that reflects your true self and higher intentions. Swathi encourages readers to practice non-reaction in small, daily interactions, such as dealing with minor frustrations like being stuck in traffic or handling stressful moments at work. These seemingly insignificant moments provide the perfect opportunity to build the habit of non-reaction, which can then be applied to more significant challenges when they arise. Swathi explains that by consistently practicing non-reaction in everyday life, we become more adept at maintaining our composure in high-pressure situations. Over time, non-reaction becomes a way of life, allowing us to navigate the ups and downs of life with greater peace, clarity, and resilience. Conclusion: embracing calm in a reactive world. In the conclusion, Swathi reflects on the importance of non-reaction in today's fast-paced, emotionally charged world. She reminds readers that while the world around us may be filled with chaos, distractions, and emotional triggers, we have the power to choose how we respond. By embracing the principles of non-reaction, we can rise above the noise and find peace in the midst of life's challenges. Swathi leaves readers with a call to action. Start small, build awareness, and gradually transform your reactions into thoughtful, intentional responses. By mastering non-reaction, you can lead a more peaceful, purposeful life and improve your relationships, decision-making, and overall well-being. In a world that constantly pushes us to react, Swathi's The Power of Not Reacting offers a much-needed guide to living with intention and calm.